Some people say the smallest things can push you over the edge. I used to think that was just an excuse people gave after losing their temper. But then, one damp Thursday evening in Portland, I walked up to the garage that had become my lifeline and found two massive contractor trucks wedged inside like they owned the place. No warning, no permission. Just a bubblegum pink note stuck to the side door with a piece of floral washi tape. The handwriting was a looped, exaggerated cursive with hearts dotting the I's, like something from a high school yearbook. And the message, God. Hi, sweetie Hyde. Borrowed your space for my contractors today. Thanks, bunches. That was it. No please, no phone number, no indication of when my space would be free again. Just pure entitlement dressed up in sugary words. I remember standing there in the drizzle, my Mustang's key cold in my palm, feeling my blood pressure spike. I'd seen plenty of self-absorbed behavior before, but this was different. This was my space, my sanctuary, my one corner of the world that was still mine after everything else had crumbled. And Savannah Lee, the self-appointed president of the Eden Falls Homeowners Association, had just walked straight into it. Let me back up before I tell you how deep this rabbit hole went. 6 months earlier, my marriage had come apart in the quietest way possible. No explosive fight, no betrayal, just two people, me and Claire, who slowly became strangers in the same house. She was a deputy sheriff, always on call. I was a senior software engineer, always on my laptop. We passed each other in the kitchen like polite coworkers. By the time we admitted it was over, the love had been gone for years. We kept it civil. She kept the house. I moved to a one-bedroom across town. We split the furniture without a fight. And when I asked if I could rent the garage to work on my late father's 2069 Mustang Fastback, she agreed without hesitation. $200 a month. No fuss. That garage was more than a place to store tools, it was therapy. Every Saturday, I'd drive over, roll up the door, and lose myself in the smell of motor oil and steel. In the hum of the fluorescent light above my workbench, in the slow, methodical resurrection of a machine that had once been broken and rusting, like I had. Working on the Mustang wasn't about horsepower, it was about control. At my coding job, problems could be messy, abstract, and sometimes unsolvable. At home, the silence was heavy enough to choke me, but under that hood, every issue had a process, every part had a place, and time plus effort equaled progress. That space became sacred. My father's wrench set lined up on the pegboard, the half-restored chrome gleaming in the corner, the small, portable heater I'd bought to keep working through the Oregon winters. It was the one place where I could breathe. So you can imagine my mood when I pulled up that Thursday and found those trucks sprawled in my spot like they were part of the furniture. At first, I thought maybe Claire had hired someone for repairs and just forgot to mention it. But Claire never forgot things like that. She was meticulous, organized to a fault. And then I saw the note. The handwriting alone was enough to make my teeth ache. But it was the tone, the assumption that lit a fuse inside me. Who just decides to use someone else's property without asking? And who has the audacity to treat it like a favor they're doing for you? The trucks were big too. F352nd with ladder racks, fresh mud caked on the tires, and toolboxes rattling in the beds. I had to park on the street half a block away, hauling my gear through the rain like some kind of trespasser in my own space. I stood there for 5 solid minutes, staring at that stupid note. My fingers itched to crumple it, but I kept it intact. Evidence. Something in my gut told me I might need it. The name Savannah Lee was printed neatly in the corner. I'd heard it before in passing, from neighbors. She'd moved in a year and a half ago, bought the big corner house with the wraparound porch, and wasted no time declaring herself the new queen bee of Eden Falls. Self-appointed HOA president, organizer of community improvement projects no one had asked for, issuer of fines for unsightly decorations and excessive street parking. Until that night, I'd kept my head down. I didn't live here, I just used the garage. Her petty games didn't concern me, but this wasn't petty anymore. This was personal. I tried the number scrawled on the note. Straight to voicemail. The greeting was nauseatingly sweet, something about neighbors working together to protect property values and the spirit of Eden Falls. I hung up halfway through. I've never been the confrontational type. In fact, Avoiding conflict was probably part of why my marriage died, the slow death it did. But as I stood there in the rain, watching droplets beat on the Mustang's faded paint through the half-open garage door, something in me shifted. This was my space. I was paying for it. And Savannah had decided that her contractors were more important than the one thing in my life keeping me sane. The polite thing would have been to leave a note back firm but courteous asking her to move the trucks. So that's what I did. I taped it to the inside of the garage door, locked up, and went home, hoping the problem would be gone by morning. It wasn't. If anything, it was worse. But I didn't know that yet. I didn't know this pink note was the opening move in a game Savannah had played before, a game she thought she could win every time. I didn't know that within a week, she'd be trying to fine me hundreds of dollars for disrupting community harmony, or that I'd be standing on my ex-wife's porch asking for backup like we were still a team. All I knew that night was this: Savannah Lee had taken my sanctuary, and I wasn't about to let her keep it. Not this time. To understand why that garage meant so much to me, you'd have to understand what my life looked like before Savannah Lee rolled her trucks into it. Claire and I met in our late 20s, when I still thought busy was a badge of honor, and she believed she could outrun burnout by sheer force of will. She was already on her way up in the sheriff's department, making arrests in the morning and writing reports at midnight. I was climbing my own ladder in the tech world, chasing promotion after promotion, convinced that the next job title would finally make me feel like I'd arrived. We built a life together out of ambition and caffeine. We bought the little craftsman house in Eden Falls because it was close to her precinct and just far enough from downtown to give me a quiet workspace. It had a deep backyard, a covered porch, and most importantly, a detached two-car garage with just enough room for my dream project. In the early days, we'd spend Sunday mornings on that porch with coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. Back then, we talked about everything: travel plans, maybe a family someday, the idea of restoring my dad's old Mustang as a someday project. But as the years stacked up, the conversations shrank. She was always leaving for a shift. I was always closing my laptop late. We became two parallel lines in the same space, close enough to see each other, but never intersecting. There was no single explosion, no final betrayal, just a slow drift until the distance felt permanent. We went to counseling twice, sat on opposite ends of the couch, and talked in polite, neutral tones. The therapist said we were mutually disengaged. That sounded about right. When we finally signed the divorce papers, it was almost anticlimactic. She kept the house. I took my books, my clothes, and the few tools my father had left me before cancer took him. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, just the quiet acknowledgement that we couldn't fix what had been breaking for years. 3 weeks later, I called her about the garage. I didn't even know why I asked. Maybe it was because every corner of my apartment felt temporary, like I was just passing through. The Mustang had been sitting in a storage unit across town, collecting dust. It was the only thing I had from my father that still felt alive. Even in its broken state, Claire didn't hesitate. $200 a month. I'll give you a key. Her voice was even, not warm, but not cold either. We weren't friends yet, but we weren't enemies. That first Saturday, I rolled up the garage door and saw the Mustang under a canvas cover, the shape of it like a sleeping animal waiting to be woken. The smell of oil and sawdust hit me, and for the first time since the move, I felt anchored. I set up my little workbench along the side wall, hung my father's wrenches in order of size, and unpacked the small parts I'd been hoarding for years. Every detail mattered. Every bolt I cleaned, every gasket I replaced, it was proof that something broken could be put back together. The work was slow, deliberate. I'd lose track of hours, sanding down rust spots until the metal shone, replacing weather stripping along the doors, tightening a loose carburetor bracket. I'd sit in the driver's seat and imagine the engine rumbling again, the smell of gasoline in the air, the tires catching on wet asphalt. It wasn't just the car. The garage itself became a sanctuary, 4 walls and a roll-up door that kept the world out. When I was there, I didn't have to be the guy who got divorced. I wasn't a developer debugging code at 1 p.m. I was just Ethan, a man with a set of tools, a playlist of old rock songs, and a machine that needed him. Some nights, I'd stay late enough that the neighborhood went quiet, the streetlights humming faintly outside. I'd lean back against the workbench, sipping a beer, and think about how different life felt here compared to the apartment. This space didn't judge me. It didn't care that my marriage failed. It didn't ask me why. And maybe that's why Savannah's trucks hit such a nerve. She hadn't just blocked a parking space, she'd intruded on the one place where I still had control. She didn't know the history in those four walls. She didn't know that my father taught me to change oil in that same Mustang when I was 16, or that Claire had once stood beside me in the garage holding a flashlight while I worked. That garage was the last piece of continuity between my old life and whatever this new one was supposed to be. And now, someone who barely knew my name had decided it was hers for the taking. I didn't realize it yet, but defending that space wasn't just about a car or a contract. It was about refusing to let someone else decide what mattered to me. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't going to back down. By the next morning, I'd convinced myself that maybe the trucks were gone, that Savannah had simply overstepped for a day, realized her mistake, and moved on. I should have known better. When I pulled up to the garage, the two contractor trucks were still there, only now a gleaming white Mercedes SUV sat across the driveway like a barricade. My barricade. I couldn't even get close enough to check if she'd touched anything inside. And taped dead center to the garage door, covering the note I'd left her, was a new letter. This one wasn't pink or bubbly. It was printed on a sheet with a fake Eden Falls HOA letterhead, complete with a gold clip art crest at the top. Violation notice. Amount due: $150. Reason: disrupting community harmony. It was absurd. So absurd, in fact, that I laughed out loud. The kind of laugh that comes when the world tilts sideways and your brain can't decide if it's a joke or a threat. The rest of the letter was pure Savannah, overwritten, condescending, and dripping with self-importance. She cited long-standing Eden Falls cooperative principles, accused me of failing to support necessary neighborhood improvement efforts, and closed with, "We trust you will remit payment promptly to maintain your standing as a contributing member of our community." I didn't even live here. I was a renter of a garage. She knew that. That afternoon, I started digging. I wasn't an HOA expert, but I knew how to research. 2 hours on the Oregon State Housing website, 3 HOA legal forums, and a handful of property law PDFs later, I had my answer. Savannah's authority was 90% fiction. HOA presidents, real ones, can't just fine people without a documented violation. They can't commandeer private property for community projects. And they certainly can't issue penalties to non-residents who have no contractual relationship with the HOA. Savannah was running her own little kingdom on smoke and mirrors, hoping no one would bother to check the rules. And judging by the way she'd plastered her fake letterhead on my garage, she was used to people falling in line. That's when I met Hazel Kim. She lived in the tidy ranch house next door, with a front yard full of hydrangeas and wind chimes that never seemed to stop. I'd seen her around before, a petite Korean woman in her 70s, always wearing a sun hat, but we'd never spoken beyond a polite wave. That morning, she appeared at the edge of the driveway with a plate of lemon bars in one hand and a look in her eye that said she already knew what was going on. "She's been pulling this with everyone," Hazel said, her accent soft but her tone sharp. 18 months, same tricks. Charges made-up fees, sends nasty letters, acts like she owns the street. Most people pay to make her go away. She told me about Mrs. Grant, who'd been fined $300 for unsanctioned Halloween decor. About the Parkers, who'd been threatened over their lawn chairs not matching the HOA's visual standard. Savannah had targeted the elderly, single parents, renters, anyone who seemed unlikely to push back. Hazel had been keeping track. Every fake notice, every photo of Savannah's contractors blocking driveways, every voicemail dripping with passive-aggressive threats. When she showed me her folder, a thick binder organized by date and incident, I realized I wasn't dealing with a quirky neighbor on a power trip. I was staring at evidence of a sustained campaign of harassment. Later that day, I got my first in-person dose of Savannah. The Mercedes door slammed shut, and there she was, striding toward me like she was making an entrance at a gala. Platinum blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, designer athleisure that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She cradled a takeout coffee in one manicured hand like it was a prop in her one-woman show. "Ethan, right?" Her voice was honey, sweet, but her eyes were cold. "I hope you're not going to be one of those difficult types who can't appreciate community improvements." I opened my mouth to explain calmly that I paid for this garage, but she cut me off with a raised hand. We're all expected to make small sacrifices for the greater good, she said. This is about property values, about keeping Eden Falls desirable. And frankly, your attitude is exactly the sort of thing that drags a neighborhood down. The arrogance was staggering. She didn't ask. She didn't apologize. She lectured me on a driveway she didn't own, in front of a garage she had no right to touch. Hazel was a few yards away, pretending to adjust her hydrangeas, phone angle just enough to catch the scene. Savannah leaned closer, her perfume cloying in the cool air. I'll overlook the first violation, but if I see any more resistance, I'll have no choice but to escalate. Do you understand? I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, at the woman who'd barged into my life with the subtlety of a wrecking ball, and I thought about all the years I'd chosen silence over conflict. About every time I'd swallowed words just to keep the peace. Not this time. I didn't know it yet, but Savannah had just made her biggest mistake, assuming I was another easy mark. I walked back into the garage without a word, closed the door, and stared at the Mustang. My reflection wavered in the half-buffed chrome. For the first time since the divorce, I felt the faint hum of fight in my chest. If Savannah wanted a battle, she'd picked the wrong garage. The next morning, I told myself I was going to be civil, professional. I wasn't going to let Savannah bait me into a shouting match that she could spin into aggressive renter threatens HOA president. I even stopped at a bakery on the way, thinking maybe the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls would calm me down. By the time I turned onto Eden Falls Lane, the bag on the passenger seat was still warm, and I'd rehearsed a calm but firm speech in my head at least 6 times. Then I saw the driveway. The Mercedes was still there, planted across the entrance like a guard dog. The contractor trucks hadn't moved an inch. From the angle of the sun on their windshields, I could tell they hadn't been touched since yesterday. And on the garage door, my garage door, was another notice. Bigger this time, laminated even. Violation. Second warning. Amount due. $300. Reason. Challenging O. Authority. I stood in the street, cinnamon rolls cooling in my hand, staring at the bold red letters. Underneath the fine amount, in smaller print, Savannah had added, "Failure to remit payment may result in a lien against your property." I didn't own any property here. She knew that. But the implication was clear. Pay up or suffer. Something in me cracked. I parked on the street again, hauled my tools down the block, and tried the garage door. Savannah had added a padlock to the latch. My key wouldn't fit. That was the moment I stopped thinking of this as a misunderstanding. This was war. I went back to my apartment, cinnamon rolls untouched, and opened my laptop. If Savannah wanted to play HOA hardball, I was going to become the Babe Ruth of HOA law. 3 hours later, I had bookmarked half a dozen state statutes, downloaded a PDF of Eden Falls' original HOA charter, and printed copies of every relevant clause. Nowhere did it grant the president unilateral authority to fine residents, block private property, or commandeer assets for community projects. What it did say was that all enforcement actions required a board vote, documented in meeting minutes, with written notice to the homeowner in advance. I'd bet my Mustang that Savannah had never held a real board vote in her life. That's when Hazel showed up at my door. She didn't bother knocking, just let herself in, a folder tucked under her arm and a serious set to her jaw. "She's escalating," Hazel said without preamble. "She's done this before. First, she intimidates. Then she invents violations. If you don't push back, she'll bleed you dry and tell everyone she's saving the neighborhood." She laid the folder on my kitchen table and opened it like a lawyer unveiling an airtight case. Photos of Savannah's contractors blocking other driveways. Copies of fines she'd issued for things like unapproved mailbox design and seasonal decorations exceeding the allowed time frame. Screenshots of emails in which she threatened to pursue legal remedies against elderly neighbors who questioned her. "She targets people who won't fight back," Hazel said. "Single moms, retirees, renters, anyone without the time or resources to take her on. Most people just pay to make her go away." I thought about my father's tools hanging on the garage wall, about the way Claire's voice had gone flat when she said we'd mutually disengaged, about all the times I'd avoided conflict because it seemed easier. Easier until it wasn't. The next day, I decided to make one last polite move before going nuclear. I typed up a letter, not a sticky note, not a voicemail, a formal written notice stating that I was a lawful renter of the garage, that her padlock was an illegal obstruction, and that she had 24 hours to remove it before I contacted law enforcement. I printed 2 copies. One went in her mailbox. The other I taped to the garage door. By evening, my letter was gone. In its place was a neon green sign that read, "Hostile behavior will not be tolerated. HOA disciplinary action pending." No signature, no explanation. Just another public attempt to paint me as the problem. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the evidence Hazel had given me, the HOA charter open on my screen, and the unopened cinnamon rolls on the counter. Being nice had gotten me padlocked out of my own garage. Being nice had doubled the fine Savannah claimed I owed. Being nice had given her room to escalate, to spin the narrative before I'd even decided to fight back. I looked at the Mustang's keys on the table, the worn leather keychain my father had carried for decades. I thought about how he'd taught me to stand my ground, how he'd say, "If you let someone take an inch, they'll take the whole damn street." Savannah had taken her inch. It was time to take it back. The morning after the neon green sign appeared, I woke up to the low hum of rain against my window and the tight knot of dread in my stomach that had been growing for days. I told myself it was just another Savannah stunt, that maybe she'd get bored and move on to her next victim. But when I pulled up to Eden Falls Lane, my pulse spiked. The padlock was still there. The Mercedes was still blocking the driveway. And a third truck bigger than the other 2 was now squeezed in at an angle, its tailgate hanging over the sidewalk. Savannah wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. Hazel spotted me before I could even get out of the car. She was standing under her porch awning with a mug of tea, watching the rain. When I walked over, she handed me a laminated sheet. "I printed this off for you," she said. It was the Eden Falls HOA charter, highlighted in neon yellow, where it specifically prohibited blocking or altering access to private property. "I think you'll find she's been breaking her own fake rules." I scanned the section she'd marked. "Enforcement actions require a majority board vote, documented in meeting minutes." I trailed off. "Does she even have a board?" Hazel smiled grimly. "Number, she is the board. At least in her mind." She invited me inside, her house smelling faintly of eucalyptus and something baking in the oven. In her living room, she pulled out her now famous binder, a heavy, overstuffed thing covered in clear plastic sleeves. "This is 18 months' worth of Savannah," Hazel said, flipping it open. Inside were photos of Savannah's SUVs parked in front of hydrants, blocking mailboxes, even idling in the fire lane outside the elementary school. There were screenshots of text messages where she threatened to recommend non-compliance fees to anyone who didn't show up for her mandatory community cleanup days. Copies of fines with absurd reasons. Unapproved mailbox flag. Improper shade of patio umbrella. Seasonal decorations displayed outside the sanctioned window. I turned the pages slowly, each one a little more ridiculous than the last. Hazel's voice hardened. She preys on people who won't fight back. Elderly neighbors. Single moms. People renting out rooms. She counts on them not knowing the rules or not having the energy to push back, and she makes them pay to make the problem go away. I leaned back, the weight of what I was seeing sinking in. "She's running a scam. Out in the open." Hazel nodded. "And now she's picked the wrong garage." That's when Hazel leaned in, lowering her voice like we were plotting a heist. "I've been waiting for someone with some fight in them," she said. "Someone she can't intimidate. I'll back you up. But you'll need more than just me." She was right. Savannah had a network, not a formal one, but a web of intimidation she'd spun across Eden Falls. To beat her, we needed our own network. By that evening, Hazel had quietly reached out to a handful of neighbors she trusted. We met in her kitchen, the rain still tapping against the windows, mugs of coffee and plates of cookies scattered between us. There was Mrs. Grant, fined $300 for her Halloween display. The Parkers, who'd been threatened over unsightly lawn chairs. A young couple, Jamie and Luis, who'd been charged $75 for letting their toddler's plastic trike sit in the driveway overnight. They all had their own Savannah story, and as each person spoke, something shifted in the room. You could see it in their eyes the moment they realized they weren't alone. We decided our first move was to gather proof more than Hazel's binder, more than my padlock photos. We document everything Savannah did in the coming days. Every fake violation, every blocked driveway, every conversation, recorded if possible. Hazel handed out small notepads from the dollar store. Write it down. Date, time, place, what happened. Don't trust your memory. She's counting on us not having records. Before we left, she looked each of us in the eye. She's been winning because she isolates people. We're not isolated anymore. Walking back to my apartment that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, not just anger, but momentum. I thought about the Mustang, sitting in the dark behind that padlock, waiting. I thought about my father's voice in my head. If you don't stand your ground, you're telling them it's okay to take more. Savannah had been taking more from this neighborhood for a year and a half. Now, for the first time, she had a real fight on her hands. And she didn't even know it yet. 2 days after our kitchen table meeting at Hazel's, the first shot of real resistance fired, though not in the way I expected. Savannah posted a long, rambling update in the Eden Falls neighborhood social group. It was titled Urgent Addressing Hostile Behavior and featured a photo of my garage door with Hazel's note visible in the corner. She described me as a volatile outsider and accused Hazel of fomenting dissent against community leadership. She even claimed I'd verbally assaulted her, something that never happened, and warned that negative influences threaten the peace and property values of Eden Falls. Normally, her posts got a few thumbs up from her loyal inner circle. This time, the comment section lit up like a Christmas tree. It started small Mrs. Grant asking why Savannah had fined her for holiday decorations in the first place. Then Jamie and Luis chimed in about the $75 toddler trike violation. Within an hour, the thread had turned into an open-air confession booth for every bad run. In Savannah had orchestrated. By evening, more than 30 residents had shared their stories. Most ended the same way. I just paid her to avoid drama. Hazel called me that night, her voice almost giddy. It's happening, she said. They're realizing they're not alone. The next day, she moved fast. She invited everyone who'd spoken up online to a neighborhood coffee hour at her place. No HOA agenda. No Savannah. Just people talking, face to face. I arrived to find Hazel's living room packed retirees, parents with toddlers, even a few people I'd never seen before. The energy was different from our small meeting. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was solidarity. One by one, people stood and told their Savannah stories. There were parking fines that never went through official HOA channels, demands for donations to improvement projects that never happened, and threats of liens that weren't legally possible. Luis had brought a manila envelope. Inside were canceled checks made out to Eden Falls HOA, all deposited into Savannah's personal account. He'd gotten suspicious when she refused to give him a receipt. The room buzzed as the implications sank in. This wasn't just overreach, this was theft. That's when Logan walked in. Savannah's 7-year-old son looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, but he stepped into the center of the room with a quiet confidence that surprised me. I don't agree with what my mom's been doing, he began, voice steady but low, and I think it's time you all know it's worse than you think. He told us about overhearing phone calls where she planned violation sweeps to raise money, how she'd ordered him to photograph offenses like mismatched flower pots, how she'd opened a credit card in his name without asking. She says she's doing it to protect the neighborhood, he said, but really it's about control. She can't stand not being in charge. For a moment, the room was silent except for the rain tapping against the windows. Then Hazel nodded, like a judge confirming testimony. That's exactly what this is, she said. Control. By the end of the meeting, we had a plan. Step 1. Formal complaints to the real HOA management company, the one Savannah had conveniently never mentioned existed. Step 2. Compile every piece of evidence, from Hazel's binder to Luis's canceled checks, into a single packet. Step 3. Demand an official emergency meeting to vote on Savannah's removal. We left Hazel's house that night knowing the battle lines had shifted. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It belonged to the whole street. Savannah must have sensed the change because the very next morning, she showed up in full theater mode. I was unlocking my apartment door when I saw her Mercedes roll to a stop outside Hazel's. She got out with a clipboard in one hand and a designer umbrella in the other, striding up the walkway like she was serving a warrant. Hazel opened the door but didn't invite her in. Savannah's voice carried across the lawn, sharp and brittle. "You're organizing against me. That's harassment, and it's illegal." Hazel didn't flinch. "So is stealing from your neighbors." I could see Savannah's jaw tighten from 30 feet away. She started gesturing wildly, her words tumbling over each other. Somewhere in the commotion, I noticed at least 4 neighbors filming from their porches. And that was the moment I knew. Savannah wasn't just losing control, she'd already lost it. The days of her ruling Eden Falls by intimidation were numbered. And we were the ones counting them down. I thought Savannah's shouting match with Hazel was peak drama. I was wrong. 2 days later, I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in months. Claire. Her voice was crisp, professional, the way it always got when she was on duty. "Ethan, I need to ask you something. Are you threatening the HOA president of Eden Falls?" For a moment, I couldn't even form words. "What? Number? Of course not. She's filed 3 separate complaints with the sheriff's department this week," Claire said, "claiming you've been harassing her, following her, and interfering with community operations. She's also saying you're an unstable renter with a history of aggression." I laughed, but it was the bitter kind. "She padlocked me out of my garage, Claire. She's the one interfering." There was a pause on the line, then her voice softened just slightly. "I figured as much. But I have to follow up on the record. And I'm coming by to take a look myself." When Claire pulled up the next afternoon in her patrol SUV, Savannah appeared within seconds, like she'd been watching from behind her blinds. She crossed the street at a near jog, her entire demeanor shifting into victim mode before she even reached the car. She was dressed for the part: tasteful blouse, conservative skirt, hair smoothed into a neat bob. In her hands was a folder stuffed with papers that I suspected were mostly her own violation notices. "Deputy Reynolds," she said, voice trembling just enough to seem rehearsed. "Thank you for coming. I feel unsafe in my own neighborhood. This man has been targeting me, spreading lies, turning people against me." Claire held up a hand. "Ma'am, I'm here to gather facts. Can you show me documentation proving you have permission to use this garage?" That was when Savannah's expression fractured. In less than 2 seconds, her face went from polite confusion to realization to barely contained panic. "This is a community improvement project," she stammered. "As HOA president, I have emergency authority to allocate." Claire cut her off. "I'm the legal owner of this property, and you're trespassing." Savannah's mouth dropped open. I swear, for a moment, she looked like she'd forgotten how to blink. "Wait, you own it? You didn't tell me." "I didn't need to tell you," Claire said. "It's not your business. What is your business is removing your vehicles immediately." It should have ended there, but Savannah didn't know when to quit. Her voice pitched higher, her words faster. She accused Claire of bias, of protecting an ex-husband, of participating in some conspiracy to undermine legitimate HOA authority. She even threatened to report this corruption to the state. Neighbors began drifting outside, phones in hand, filming. Hazel leaned against her mailbox, her expression somewhere between amused and satisfied. Through all of it, Claire stayed cool. She wrote Savannah a parking citation for blocking the driveway, handed it over with professional courtesy, and told her she had 30 minutes to move the vehicles or risk towing. Savannah snatched the ticket like it was a personal insult and stormed back to her Mercedes. After the crowd dispersed, Claire and I finally spoke without Savannah in earshot. It was the first real conversation we'd had in months, and it felt different. "You sound stronger than the last time we talked," she said. "I feel stronger," I admitted. "I'm not letting people push me around anymore." She smiled faintly, the corners of her eyes softening. "That was part of the problem before, you know. You'd rather disappear than stand your ground." "Not anymore," I said. And I meant it. But Savannah wasn't done. That night, Hazel texted me a screenshot from the neighborhood group. Savannah had posted 12 separate rants in the span of an hour, accusing Claire and me of collusion and abusing law enforcement to silence community leadership. It was unhinged, rambling paragraphs about outsiders undermining order, threats to contact the local news, even an invitation for residents to sign a petition demanding Claire's removal from the sheriff's department. Buried halfway down the thread was a single comment from Logan. Mom, please stop. You're making it worse. No emoji, no sarcasm, just a simple plea that cut through the noise. Hazel called me minutes later. If Logan's speaking up publicly, that means he's ready. And if he's ready, we might be about to get the inside story. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. For weeks, Savannah had been the one pulling everyone else into her mess. Now, her own son might be about to turn the tide. And this fight was about to get personal in a way she couldn't control. It happened faster than I thought it would. One day, Savannah was flooding the neighborhood group with accusations and half-baked conspiracies. 2 days later, Hazel's backyard was full of people more than I'd ever seen gathered in one place since I'd been using the garage. Folding chairs scraped against the grass. Thermoses of coffee and trays of cookies passed from hand to hand. There was no formal agenda, no official HOA stamp, just neighbors, tired of being pushed around, deciding to do something about it. The air buzzed with that specific mix of frustration and relief you get when you realize you're not the only one who's been wronged. Mrs. Grant was there, clutching copies of her bogus $300 Halloween fine. Luis had a stack of canceled checks. Jamie had printed screenshots of threatening emails about the toddler trike violation. Every story added another brick to the wall Savannah had built between herself and the community, and now that wall was about to come down. Hazel stood at the center of the circle, her trusty binder open in front of her. "I'm not here to tell you what to do," she said, "but I am here to remind you that she doesn't own us. The HOA belongs to all of us, and right now, it's being run by someone who was never legally elected and is abusing the position she took." There were murmurs of agreement, heads nodding. Even the more reserved neighbors, the ones who normally avoided eye contact, leaned forward, listening closely. Hazel went on. "Here's the good news. We don't need Savannah's permission to fix this. We can call our own meeting, we can vote, and if we follow the bylaws unlike her, it will be legitimate." That's when Logan stepped forward. His voice was steady, but you could see the strain in his face. "I've lived with her my whole life, and I've seen what she's like when she thinks no one's watching. She's not going to stop unless you make her stop. She's not doing this for the neighborhood, she's doing it for herself." He pulled out his phone. "I have videos, recordings, proof she's been taking HOA money and using it for personal expenses. Proof she's been bragging about making up violations to teach people lessons." The crowd went quiet. Then Hazel spoke. "Would you be willing to share that?" Logan nodded. "That's why I'm here." We watched as Logan airdropped files to Hazel's laptop, grainy videos of Savannah on speakerphone, mocking elderly neighbors for folding so fast when she fined them. Screenshots of bank statements with HOA checks deposited into her personal account. A voice memo where she literally said, "I don't need their permission. They're too scared to challenge me." When the last file finished transferring, Hazel closed the laptop with a decisive snap. "That's enough to take to the real HOA board and to the police if we have to. But first, we take it to the neighborhood." The plan came together in less than an hour. We'd hold an emergency meeting at the Community Park Pavilion, public, documented, and in line with the original HOA bylaws. Hazel would post notices on every mailbox. We'd circulate the petition to trigger a removal vote. And when Savannah inevitably tried to crash the meeting, we'd have the proof ready. I left Hazel's that night with a stack of flyers to tape up along my route home. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like wet asphalt and something electric, like a storm that hadn't finished. For weeks, Savannah had been the only one dictating the pace of this fight. Now, we were the ones setting the clock. 2 days later, the park pavilion was full. 47 residents showed up, more than enough for a quorum. People stood shoulder to shoulder, talking in low voices. Hazel opened the meeting with a clear statement of purpose: to vote on the removal of Savannah Lee as HOA president. Savannah arrived 15 minutes in, stomping up the steps in a bright red coat like she was walking into a trial she planned to win. She tried to speak over Hazel, waving a stack of papers and shouting about illegal gatherings and defamation. That's when Hazel hit play on Logan's recordings. Savannah's own voice filled the pavilion, bragging about making up violations, ridiculing neighbors, and describing exactly how she pocketed HOA funds. Every time she tried to interrupt, someone shushed her. By the third clip, she'd stopped yelling. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. 47-0 in favor of removal. Hazel was appointed interim president on the spot, tasked with cleaning up 18 months of chaos. The crowd broke into applause, short, sharp, and full of the kind of energy that comes from finally taking something back. Savannah stood frozen for a few seconds, scanning the faces around her. Maybe she was looking for someone to defend her. No one did. When she finally turned and walked out, head high but shoulders tight, it felt like the neighborhood exhaled all at once. For the first time since I'd parked my Mustang in that garage, Eden Falls felt like it belonged to its residents again, not to the self-appointed queen who'd ruled it by fear. For a few hours after the vote, Savannah disappeared. No Mercedes prowling the street, no laminated violation notices taped to doors. The neighborhood was quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural, like the air right after a power outage. But by the next morning, she was back online. She posted 12 separate messages in the neighborhood group between midnight and sunrise, accusing Hazel of orchestrating a coup, claiming the vote was invalid, and describing herself as the victim of a smear campaign fueled by jealousy of a strong female leader. Each post was longer than the last, unraveling into half-baked legal threats and wild conspiracy theories. Hazel texted me screenshots at 6 a.m. "She's spiraling," the message read. "This is good. She's documenting her own instability." By midday, Savannah had shifted tactics. She filed a formal complaint against Claire with the sheriff's department, accusing her of conflict of interest and abuse of power. She called my employer, claiming I'd threatened her and that my unstable behavior posed a risk to company assets. The call backfired. My boss, a 30-something tech founder who'd been following the drama through Hazel's posts, called me into his office, shut the door, and grinned. "She actually called here," he said, almost laughing. "Wanted us to fire you for anti-community activity. I told her we don't take HR advice from strangers with Facebook rants." He leaned forward. "If you want to take some time off to deal with this, do it, and document everything. Might make a great blog post someday." Meanwhile, Logan was quietly working behind the scenes. He started uploading short, carefully edited clips to TikTok, snippets of Savannah's recorded phone calls, shots of her fake violation letters, even audio of her bragging about breaking people down so they comply. The videos exploded. Within days, number HO horror story was trending. Commenters shared their own battles with overreaching HO boards. Memes of Savannah's most arrogant quotes flooded the internet. Local news picked it up next. They sent a camera crew to Eden Falls, interviewed Hazel on her porch, and aired Logan's evidence during the evening segment. The headline: "Self-appointed HO, president removed after allegations of fraud, harassment." The real blow came a week later, in the form of official paperwork taped to Savannah's front door. Foreclosure notice. Hazel was the one who spotted it first. She knocked on my door, her expression a mix of satisfaction and pity. Turns out she hasn't been paying her mortgage for months. Guess all that HOA money went somewhere else. The foreclosure timeline matched perfectly with the period when Savannah's behavior had grown most aggressive. It was clear now. She'd been using the fake fines and donations to patch her personal finances, hoping to buy herself time. And now, time had run out. When Savannah was finally summoned to court on charges of misappropriating HOA funds, harassment, and trespassing, she arrived with a new lawyer in tow, a slick, overconfident type in a tailored suit. It didn't last. Halfway through the hearing, Savannah interrupted the judge to lecture him on the realities of community leadership, insisting that her emergency authority was exempt from standard HOA bylaws. When he reminded her she wasn't actually elected, she accused him of judicial bias against women in power. Her lawyer put his pen down, whispered something to her, and then in an unprecedented moment stood up and withdrew from the case. "Your Honor, I can't represent a client who refuses to follow legal advice." The rest of the hearing was Savannah representing herself, growing more erratic with each objection overruled. The judge's final ruling was swift. She was ordered to pay $8,000 in legal fees to cover the frivolous lawsuits she'd filed against neighbors, barred from holding any HOA office for life, and placed under a restraining order prohibiting contact with 12 residents, including me, Hazel, and Logan. As the gavel fell, Savannah blurted out, "This is discrimination against HOA presidents. You're all part of the conspiracy." The outburst made the local news reel, and by evening was a meme captioned, "When you're the HOA and the HOA says number." By the time the moving trucks arrived to empty her house, The neighborhood was watching from porches and windows. Savannah kept her head down, but she couldn't avoid the fact that her empire had crumbled piece by piece, in full view of the people she tried to rule. Logan left with his father that same week, his shoulders lighter, his eyes clearer. Hazel's binder became something of a legend, copied and shared with other communities dealing with their own Savannahs. Claire got a formal commendation from her department for professionalism in a personally complicated case. And me? I finally rolled the Mustang out of the garage, sunlight glinting off its new chrome, and took it for the first real drive in years. The engine roared, the street opened up ahead of me, and I realized I'd taken back more than just a parking space. I'd taken back myself. 6 months after Savannah's final day in Eden Falls, the neighborhood looked and felt like a different place. The tension that had once hung in the air like static was gone. Neighbors lingered on sidewalks to chat instead of hurrying inside. Kids played in driveways without anyone worrying about violations. The community bulletin board outside the park pavilion, once plastered with Savannah's orders, now held flyers for potlucks, garage sales, and volunteer events. Hazel, now the officially elected HOA president, ran meetings with an open agenda and a clear set of rules. Every decision was documented, every vote recorded. She even kept a second binder, modeled after her Savannah files, to ensure transparency for future boards. The change was tangible, and in ways I didn't expect, it mirrored what was happening in my own life. The garage, my garage, was once again a sanctuary, but it felt different now. Not just because the padlock was gone or because I could come and go without interference. It felt different because I'd fought for it and won. The Mustang sat in the center, fully restored. Chrome polished to a mirror shine, new paint deep enough to swallow the sunlight. When I turned the key, the engine's growl vibrated through my chest like a heartbeat. I'd finished the work I started years ago, but more than that, I'd proven to myself that I could see something through no matter how messy it got along the way. One Saturday, I took it out for a drive with the windows down, following the winding road that led out of town. Somewhere along the way, I realized the heavy feeling I'd carried since my divorce was gone. In its place was something steadier, stronger. Claire and I had found a new rhythm. We weren't getting back together, that chapter had closed, but we'd rebuilt something better suited to who we were now. Friends, allies, people who could count on each other when it mattered. There were moments dropping off a spare garage key, laughing about Savannah's courtroom meltdown, when it struck me how different those conversations felt. No unspoken resentments, no walking on eggshells, just mutual respect and a quiet understanding of where we'd been. She told me once, standing up to her, "I think it reminded you of yourself." I think she was right. Logan was thriving too. After moving in with his dad, he'd started at a new school and poured his energy into filmmaking. His TikTok account had evolved into a platform where other kids shared stories of living with controlling or manipulative parents. He'd been invited to speak at a youth leadership conference, and the documentary he was making about life under the HOA tyrant had already won a small film festival award. Sometimes he'd swing by with his camera to grab a few shots of the Mustang for his B-roll. Hazel would slip him cookies on the way out, telling him, "Don't forget to put in the part where we kicked her out." As for the neighborhood, it had become a kind of case study. Other communities started reaching out to Hazel for advice on handling rogue HOA leaders. She'd give them the same message she gave us. Document everything. Stick together. Don't let them isolate you. Eden Falls even hosted its first annual Community Strength Day, a block party with food trucks, music, and a silent auction for local charities. I helped set up a small car show section and parked the Mustang front and center. People stopped to admire it, but the real conversations were about how far we'd all come since the days of laminated notices and padlocked garages. Looking back, I realized Savannah's downfall wasn't just about one bad neighbor finally getting what she deserved. It was about the ripple effect of refusing to accept abuse, how one act of resistance can grow into a movement when people see they're not alone. For me, it was about more than winning a fight over a garage. It was about reclaiming my voice after years of staying quiet, about proving to myself that I could face conflict without losing who I was. And for Eden Falls, it was about transforming from a collection of cautious, disconnected households into a real community, one that looked out for each other instead of looking the other way. Sometimes I still think about Savannah, Rumor has it she moved in with her mother in another state and is already causing trouble in the senior living complex. I doubt she's changed, but it doesn't matter. She can't touch this place anymore. The garage door still rolls up with the same steady hum, the smell of oil and steel greeting me like an old friend. But now, when I step inside, I don't just see a car. I see the place where I learned that boundaries are worth defending, that allies can be found in unexpected places, and that sometimes the worst storms leave behind the clearest skies. And every time I take the Mustang out, I remind myself, the road ahead is mine to choose. In the end, the fight over a garage was never just about a place to park a car. It was about dignity. It was about refusing to let someone else decide what mattered to you. For me, that small, oil-scented space became a line in the sand. I'd spent years avoiding conflict, letting things slide, convincing myself that silence was the same as peace. But silence can be permission. And the moment I stopped giving that permission, everything began to change. Standing up to Savannah wasn't simply about winning, it was about learning that courage grows when you act, even if your voice shakes. It was about finding allies in unexpected places. A neighbor with a binder full of truth, a teenager brave enough to speak out against his own mother, an ex-wife who could put aside the past to do what was right. Eden Falls learned the same lesson I did, that communities are strongest when people stand together. Intimidation only works in isolation. Once we started speaking openly, the fear lost its power. What began as one person defending a garage became dozens defending each other. Life will always have its Savannahs, people who try to take more than they're owed, who hide behind titles or authority. You can't control that, but you can control whether you stand your ground, whether you protect the spaces, physical or emotional, that matter to you. Sometimes the hardest part is taking the first step, saying enough, when it's easier to stay quiet. But every time someone finds that courage, it creates space for others to do the same. And if you're lucky, you'll find that what you've reclaimed isn't just your property, it's yourself.